Hi, friends. Today we are picking up with more plagues, Exodus chapter 8, beginning with verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will plague your whole country with frogs. The river shall swarm with frogs. They shall come up into your palace, into your bedchamber and your bed, and into the houses of your officials and of your people, and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and on your people and on all your officials.'" And the Lord said to Moses, "Say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, the canals, and the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt." So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts and brought frogs up on the land of Egypt. Okay, so a couple of things to note here. First of all, this time God tells Pharaoh ahead of time what he's going to do if Pharaoh doesn't do what God's asked him to do. So he tells him, "Look, I'm going to send a whole bunch of frogs." And we just continue to see how self-destructive Pharaoh is here, because even knowing what's coming, he's not willing to back down. And then again, after all these frogs that are everywhere in their bedchambers and their beds and in their ovens and their kneading bowls. I mean, these frogs are everywhere. Pharaoh has his magicians conjure more frogs. Now, we don't need to spend a lot of energy figuring out how they were able to do it. The point here is, he is so intent on trying to prove his own power, and that that God's power is not all that impressive, because look, I can make somebody do that too. That he is willing to inflict his country with more of the bad thing that's already there. Not a stable guy, Pharaoh. Okay, verse 8. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Pray to the Lord to take away the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord." Moses said to Pharaoh, "Kindly tell me when I am to pray for you and for your officials and for your people, that the frogs may be removed from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile." And he said, "Tomorrow." Moses said, "As you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs shall leave you and your houses and your officials and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile." Okay, so this seems like God finally got his attention, right? Oh, okay, these frogs, they're pretty inconvenient. So Pharaoh summons Moses and says, Aaron, and says, "Look, pray to God for us, make these frogs go away." And Moses is like, "Okay." And just to show you, so that you can be certain that it is God who is doing this, tell me when you want me to pray, and then you'll know that it really was God, because I will pray, and at that same time, the frogs will go away. Pharaoh says, "Tomorrow," and Moses says, "Great." And let's see what happens next. Verse 13. And the Lord did as... verse 12. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried out to the Lord concerning the frogs that he had brought upon Pharaoh. And the Lord did as Moses requested. The frogs died in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Okay, so it seems for a moment that Pharaoh is like, "Okay, fine, I'm going to let you go. Just get rid of these frogs." But when there was a respite, so when the pressure, when they let up just a little bit from the pressure on Pharaoh, he hardened his heart. Notice he's the one hardening his heart here, and reneged on the agreement, just as God had predicted that he would. All right, verse 16. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt." Just what you need when you have a whole bunch of dead frogs is gnats. And they did so, verse 17. Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and gnats came on humans and animals alike. All the dust of the earth turned into gnats throughout the whole land of Egypt. The magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, but they could not. There were gnats on both humans and animals. And the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So you might remember a while back in one of my sermons on Sunday, I said that Exodus is a story of escalation. And we're seeing this escalation here because now These plagues are to the point that the magicians are not able to replicate what God is doing. And in fact, they've got it figured out, right? They're saying, Pharaoh, look, this is God acting. Like, it's time to back down. But Pharaoh is not listening. His heart was hardened. Now, this time it's in the passive voice. It doesn't say he's doing it. It doesn't say God's doing it. So we're not entirely clear on the subject of the hardening here. But he would not listen to them. And the point, of course, is that God was right about how Pharaoh would act. All right, on to more insects. Verse 20. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh as he goes out to the water, and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go, so that they may worship me. For if you will not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies on you, your officials, and your people, and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, so also the land where they live.'" All right, so this time God is once more giving Pharaoh an option, telling him what the punishment is going to be ahead of time. So he's making an informed decision here. Verse 22, "But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people live, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I, the Lord, am in this land. Thus I will make a distinction between my people and your people. The sign shall appear tomorrow." We can imagine that the political pressure is building on Pharaoh because the Egyptians now can see that they are being targeted by these plagues. It's that God's people are being exempted and the Egyptians are being targeted, and it's all because their king won't back down, won't listen to the God who he is engaged in this kind of, power struggle with. Also notice here that God again says one of the purposes of this is so that you may know, so that Pharaoh may know, and by extension, that Egypt might know who God is. So there's, again, we talked about this before, I think, that, yes, the number one priority for God's work here in Egypt is to get his people out. But number two is to make sure the Egyptians know that he is God, and by extension, that Pharaoh is not, that his power is limited. Okay, verse 24. "The Lord did so, and great swarms of flies came into the house of Pharaoh and into his officials' houses. In all of Egypt, the land was ruined because of the flies. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, 'Go, sacrifice to your God within the land.'" So now Pharaoh still thinks he's in a position to compromise, right? Like, okay, you can sacrifice to your God, but just stay here to do it. Verse 26, "But Moses said, 'It would not be right to do so, for the sacrifices that we offer to the Lord our God are offensive to the Egyptians. If we offer in the sight of the Egyptians sacrifices that are offensive to them, will they not stone us? We must go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he commands us.' So Pharaoh said, 'I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, provided you do not go very far away. Pray for me.' Then Moses said, 'As soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from his officials, and from his people. Only do not let Pharaoh again deal falsely by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord.'" Okay, so Pharaoh, Moses and Aaron say, "Hey, we can't do our sacrifices here because the Egyptians are going to stone us because our sacrifices are offensive to them." Okay, Pharaoh seems to take their word for it. He doesn't challenge that. And then Pharaoh's like, "Fine, okay, you can go, but just don't go very far. And also pray for me because I got all these flies around," right? So Moses does, again, he said, "Okay, I'm going to leave here. I'm going to pray that they go away tomorrow, but don't trick us this time." Verse 30. "So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord did as Moses asked. He removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his officials, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and would not let the people go." All right, next plague, chapter 9. "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to Pharaoh and say to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go so that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, the hand of the Lord will strike with a deadly pestilence your livestock in the field, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the herds, and the flocks. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the Israelites. The Lord set a time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. And on the next day the Lord did so. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but the livestock of the Israelites, not one died. Pharaoh inquired and found that not one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he would not let the people go. Okay, so again, we see this distinction. And now instead of just like flies that are a nuisance, we're talking about their actual, like their livestock, what's going to feed their families, what's going to help them work the fields. Like, this is a big deal. And now by now it's going to be, entirely evident to the Egyptians that Pharaoh is playing with fire, and they are the ones that are losing out, because the Israelites, they're doing just fine. Their livestock's fine. And you even notice here in verse 7 that Pharaoh inquired and found that not one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. So Pharaoh verified, and it was like, yeah, it did go the way that God said it would, or that Moses and Aaron on behalf of God had said it would. And still he will not relent. Notice how the people he is hurting in this story are his own, right? Obviously, the Israelites are still enslaved. God's working on that. But when this Pharaoh feels his power threatened, he behaves in ways that are not protecting the people he's meant to serve, but hurting them in dramatic ways that can't easily be undone. The livestock are all dead now. This isn't like flies and gnats or even frogs. This is their livelihood and their being able to feed themselves and their families. Okay, so we are going to stop there for today, and we will take a look at some more plagues tomorrow. I hope you'll tune in. Thanks for reading with me.